of them, like Spinoza, you wrote about Spinoza, how he created a God who is eternal, and also the nature, which is also eternal. And he completely removed ethics from divine realm and brought it into the hands of man. This moral accountability away from God. Do you think that is one of the reasons for theorizing a materialistic universe?
I really do. See, this is what now there have been a few materialists lately who've actually admitted, well, we wanted there to be no God so we could mess around sexually in college. I mean, some of them have actually admitted that, but most will not admit that they don't want to be accountable to a God that is greater than they are. I would argue they also don't want to be grateful, right? We just want to accept what we have and not say thank you to anybody. But again, Spinoza came from a Jewish background, but he was actually thrown out of the Jewish synagogue because even though he said he believed in God, he said God was the same thing as nature. Now, Paul, this is interesting because you're from India, I believe, and we often think of, when we think of the West and the East, it is true that generally speaking, in the West, there's more focus on what's called the transcendence of God, that God is wholly other and outside the universe. But in a lot of Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism and others like Jainism, there is a focus on the immanence of God, so that God is one and in the world, right? And in Hinduism, it's not so much polytheism, lots of gods, it's pantheism, everything is God. And there are, if you read the Gita, which is part of the Mahabharata, if you read the Gita, it's what's called monism, that everything is one. Brahman is Atman, right? The universe and I are the same thing. And it's an illusion when we think things are separate. Now, it is true that that idea is stronger in the East than in the West, but people like Spinoza basically was a monist. He tried to argue that everything is one. There is no distinction between God or the nature, or like I said, as it says in the Gita, Brahman is Atman. They're all the same. And in one sense, that sounds philosophically profound. But what it does is it leaves us totally unaccountable because everything is as it is. There is no uh, God outside of nature to whom we are accountable. There's no way to really grow and move beyond ourselves because everything is one. And again, in some ways, it sounds poetic. The Gita is a beautiful poem, but what it does is it makes everything loses its meaning. We no longer have a God who has created, who has put a special purpose in each one of us. And you would think, doesn't everybody want purpose? Well, if purpose comes with accountability, no, I'd rather just be left alone. See, C.S. Lewis, who is really one of my mentors, C.S. Lewis said that something like pantheism or monism is a wonderful, user-friendly God. Well, he didn't use that phrase. We say that today. Why? Because it's nice, like Spinoza, to believe in God, because when it's beautiful outside and the sun is shining and everything's wonderful, it's nice to be able to think that there's something more out there. But when we want to do something really kind of seedy and nasty, it's nice to know that the universe doesn't care what we do. So again, nobody wants to admit this, but they do. See, we have this idea that scientists are always objective and rational, but they are human beings as well, fallen human beings, and they'd like to keep God out of things. And so you make a system where if you want to mention God, you can, but if not, it doesn't make a difference. And again, Spinoza is very early. He's the same time as Descartes. He's really almost before the Enlightenment, but he's already, and again, he was Jewish. But now this is weird, Paul. I don't know if you've met it, but more in the New York area, I meet more and more Jews who are embarrassed by the idea of chosenness. They're actually embarrassed to think that they're the chosen people. But part of this goes back to Spinoza, this idea that you want a God who does not choose, a God who doesn't have likes and dislikes, a God who does not have moral indignation or righteous anger. This is a God that we can control. And so, in one sense, it sounds humble. I'm not the chosen people, nothing special about me. But it's almost a kind of pride because it says, no one stands in judgment over me. So there's always mixed motives that we have to be aware of.
I think that's a great point because Einstein used it to say he believes in Spinoza's God.
Right.
And if you look into Einstein's life, he was he was cheating on his wife. I mean,
See?
he was cheating on his first wife. He was cheating on his second wife. He had countless affairs. And yes, Einstein was a great scientist. He gave us theory of relativity.
Right.
Everything is so great, but he probably didn't like the idea of moral accountability to
Right.
God. And it was easy for him to say, I just believe in Spinoza's God.
Right. Well, did you see the excellent movie? I think it's called The Man Who Saw God. It's about a famous uh, mathematician from India. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It was Ramanujan.
Yes. Now he was not a Christian. He was Hindu. But what's interesting about that movie, now of course he's in Oxford or Cambridge, which is supposed to be a Christian country, but most of the people he meets are not believers, like Bertrand Russell. But it's interesting that this man who's a Hindu is putting these at least cultural Christians to shame by showing it was beautiful. They showed the sense of awe and wonder and gratitude he felt in the face of the world. Now, again, he didn't really understand a personal God, but I really do think that God raises people up like that to put Christians to shame. We kind of forget that we're living in a, you want to call it a God haunted universe, and that God is bigger than we are. And we don't. Einstein didn't invent the theory of relativity. He discovered it, right? It was already there. He didn't make up E equals mc squared. He discovered something that was put there from the beginning. And when we understand science like that, it opens up to something that's much wilder and stranger and more beautiful and more awesome.
Ramanujan used it to say that, I mean, he was so proficient. We are still using his mathematics,
Wow,
string
see?
theory, and quantum mechanics, and all that. And he used it to say every time he comes up with a mathematical equation, he would take some time to worship God
Wow.
because those pure mathematics, all those equations are so beautiful,
Right.
and they would connect him to physical discoveries.
Wow.
Like the mathematical calculations he was making in his mind, helping him to understand even the physical world.
Wow. You know,
And I thought that was so profound.
it is I mean, as you know, that when you're a physicist or a scientist and you're trying to determine whether your new principle is true, one of the criteria that one of those scientific principles is true is what they call elegance. The more beautiful and simple and elegant it is, the more likely it is to be true. That would not be the case if we lived in a universe that was totally random. Only true if we live in a universe that has been designed and fashioned and framed. Wow.
Earlier, you mentioned Carl Sagan's words that nature is, was, and always will be. And it is interesting, like China is officially atheist nation, and Mao Zedong,
Right.
during his lifetime, he outlawed teaching of Big Bang theory in
Wow.
China because he said that when people think about, if they accept Big Bang theory, they will think about God.
Wow. I hadn't heard that, but that makes
And,
sense. He
and
knows.
he said, we are not going to teach Big Bang theory in any Chinese schools because we are an atheist nation.
Wow.
The
See?
yeah, the Big Bang theory has these theistic implications, showing us that the universe had a beginning, so it must have a creator God.
Right.
And Carl Sagan still went on to make his Cosmos teleseries and play with those words that nature is, was, and always will be.
And as he probably knew, he was rather blasphemously taking in Revelation chapter 4. John is taken up into the throne room of God, where he sees the cherubim and seraphim and the 24 elders all worshiping God, like the beautiful hymn, Holy, Holy, Holy. And what do they say again and again and again? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and who is to come. And really, in some ways, Carl Sagan is, I think he's stealing that, right? And whoo, he was an interesting fellow.
So take everything, every attribute of God, and fix it on matter.
Exactly. And it's just, like I said, they do this all the time. They speak of nature and chance and matter as if it had choice and purpose. And in my book, I also mentioned that the communists do that with history. They speak of history as if it's a force that's moving things, and the party is history. You see that in China, you see it in the Soviet Russia. And again, no, history doesn't do anything. It's not a causative agent. And yet they want to do that. They want to rob it of any kind of personality. See, even people who believe in God, they like to say, okay, I'm personal. God must be impersonal. God is not impersonal. He's transpersonal. He's more than we are, not less than we are. Nature, which is unconscious, amoral, and it cannot therefore create something that is conscious and moral and purposeful and free. You can't, the old phrase is water cannot rise above its source, right? So something that is impersonal cannot create personality. Something which is deterministic and has no choice cannot create something that has free will. And these are just, you know, we mentioned a moment ago a Hindu scientist. If you go way, way back, there was a famous Muslim philosopher named Kalam, and he posited something that people have gone back to. He said it's what you call a syllogism. And first he said, whatever comes into being must have a cause. And even Epicurus understood nothing comes from nothing. That's a basic law of physics and science. So the first premise that all people should accept is that anything that comes into existence must have a cause. The second part is the universe had a beginning. It came into existence. Therefore, the universe must have a cause. So here's a Muslim scientist over 1,000 years ago saying this. Now we've got to come back to it. It took science thousands of years to catch up with the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's ironic. It's ironic.